Singularity.
My name is Nicola, and you're watching Singularity FM, the place where we interview the future. If you guys enjoy this podcast, you can show your support by writing a brief review on iTunes or by becoming a patron on interviewthefuture.com. My guest today is Jacob Ward. Jake is a veteran journalist who has spent his career at the intersection of technology, human behavior, and social change. He's reported for NBC News, Al Jazeera, and Popular Science. His latest book, The Loop, is one of the most straightforward and unsettling explanations of how AI is quietly shrinking the space in which human choice still exists. And that is the core idea I want to explore together with Jake today. That technology is creating a world with fewer and fewer real choices. And what would it take for us to push back? So, welcome to Singularity FM, Jake.
Nicola, I really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. So, imagine we're not on a podcast. We meet somewhere. I know you love surfing. So, let's say we meet on the beach. We're both walking towards the waves or towards the water. And I say, nice to meet you, Jake. Who is Jake Ward? How would you introduce yourself in a sentence or two?
Oh, I really appreciate that. So I guess I would say, with my board under my arm, I would say something like I'm a journalist. I've covered technology for the majority of my career. And in the last 10, 12 years, I've been focused on AI and its effect on how we make our choices. I wrote a big book that came out about a year before ChatGPT did that predicted that we would not be ready for the effect of commercial AI on our brains. And that's why you're catching me surfing today, is because I'm so depressed by watching my thesis come to life that I've decided to spend the rest of the year surfing, which is kind of what my last year and a half has been like.
Well, if we end up surfing, that's not too bad of an end in my books.
It's pretty good. Pretty good. No, it's a high quality problem. My depressed surfing year has been pretty good, I have to say.
But tell me, you have reported from newsrooms, labs, battlefields of disinformation in Silicon Valley. What's the path or occasion or a single event that pushed you to studying the intersection of human psychology and technology? Why and how did you end up doing what you do?
Well, I really appreciate that. I was once upon a time trying to sort of emulate the classic version of technology. Basically, there's a lot of in the 90s when I first started as a journalist, and then in the 2000s, the fashion was that journalists covering technology were kind of supposed to be like sports reporters, right? You're kind of a fan, right? You're supposed to be covering tech because because you love it, right? Or you cover the CEOs because you're really interested in who's in and who's out. You know, it's a real fans kind of coverage, is what it was. And then working for Al Jazeera, I always kind of bristled against that idea because I was very, I think by my nature, I'm a little bit, a little anti-capitalist and a little bit, I was raised by a historian of colonialism and slavery, and my mom is a kind of fight the power academic. So I just really grew up in a kind of contrary intellectual mindset. So I was bothered by how we praised technology, and then I got the opportunity to do a documentary series called Hacking Your Mind that was all about how human beings make decisions, and it was a crash course for me in the last century, really, of behavioral science, which more or less shows us, the headline of it is, that we are incredibly predictable in how we make the vast majority of our decisions. And those decisions, it turns out, are actually pretty manipulatable because we are so predictable. And I went to a dinner party one night once in San Francisco where a group of tech people were hosting a pair of addiction experts. And those addiction experts who had literally studied why and how people become addicted to substances were now selling their abilities, their training, in teaching, basically as consultants to teach app makers and tech makers how to make their apps as addictive as possible. And I remember sitting there and listening to this mishmash of behavioral science and the profit incentive and data gathering. And I just remember thinking, there's a real problem coming, especially as these technologies get better and better at sort of reading the patterns in our behavior and predicting those patterns and shaping those patterns. And then I basically, that as AI began to take shape around me, this was before transformer models, which made ChatGPT possible and the other LLMs. But, as I was watching these early versions of machine learning and neural networks and human reinforcement learning, I started to realize, oh, this is coming and it's going to be very, very problematic if we don't at least try to start identifying the vulnerabilities in our brains. And so normally I'm the kind of person who sees a problem, does a small report on it and moves on because there are so many things to cover. But in this case, I just thought, man, this is a big problem. And so I decided to do my, this book about it.
Yeah, you actually tell the story about that dinner in your book. And
right.
To me, it was kind of chilling too. And sort of like, I don't know what's the right word, how blind the people present were to the fact that they were considering themselves as completely exempt or outside of the rules, if you will, both outside of the rules of addiction, because that only happened to those other people,
Right.
people with pain or, other kind of moral or other flaws, but also outside of any ethical system, which would potentially limit, if not entirely prevent them to kind of prey. And I think that's the right word here, prey on those who are weaker or have pain and stuff like that. So that was very, very chilling to me.
Well, let me also point out just what a wonderful thing it is to be speaking to somebody who's read the book. Usually I don't care whether people have read the book. I just want them to buy the book. But in your case, I love that you have read the book. So that's right. Yes, it was a very chilling evening for that reason. And it was, as a journalist, you pick these moments not because they are a one-off experience, but because they represent something larger, right? And in my case, what that dinner represented was this pattern that I have seen throughout my career of people in that world, as you say, feeling that they are exempt from typical, from the kind of moral compunctions that, and legal compunctions that other people feel they should follow, and feeling that they are also in a way above the kinds of propensities for addiction or everything else, right? And I have a friend who says that a lot of people in tech are like the friend that watches Akira too much and doesn't quite get that it's not about having fun superpowers. It's actually about the danger of power, and that all of the screaming people in the background, they're the actual focus of that movie. It's not about Akira himself. And so, it's that feeling. You're absolutely right of we are separate from this world. Now, I will point out one of the things, and I think this was true in this dinner party. Most of the people there, this was at a heady time when people were, between 2016 and 2020, trying to sort of reckon with what tech was doing. And so these were people who, in theory, were trying to make their apps as addictive as possible, but the apps were trying to get you to save money or trying to get you to lose weight, right? They were paternalistic, but in theory positive. And this is a thing that is, I think, the centerpiece of the AI movement we're in right now, is that the people making those systems really believe, I think, in their hearts that they are bringing us to a better day. And so the short-term running roughshod over morals and laws and the rest of it doesn't matter, because in the long term, we're going to have such a positive effect using AI. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, state paternalism is definitely a no-no, but corporate-sponsored AI paternalism, perfectly cool. Uh,
That's right. That's right.
it
That's right. How could it be wrong? This is America. You're just making money off it. It's fine. That's right.
And what you said before that about the sci-fi warning, the Akira, reminded me to one of my previous interviews. I think it was Adam Becker who, in his book Everything More Forever, was talking about the startup CEO who released a PR statement saying, the science fiction book titled "Don't Build Oh Mighty Powerful AI Killer Machine." We are very happy to let you know that we have now built the almighty powerful all killer machine.
That's right. That's right. No, I mean that push, the idea that we're going to build it and then we'll figure out afterwards what problem we've created and solve it then is definitely it's endemic to the industry. That's right.
So let's start step by step here. What is the thesis of your book, The Loop? If you had to compress your book into one sentence for someone who has never heard of it, what is your core thesis?
My core thesis is that AI is going to do to our ability to make good decisions as individuals and as a society what Google Maps has done to our sense of direction. It's going to, so that's the sentence. A prosthetic decision-making system foisted on us for profit is going to be an irresistible tool to adopt, and it's going to work its way like water between floorboards into all corners of our lives, not just because these companies want that to happen, but also because of the nature of our brains and their ancient instinct to give decision-making authority away whenever possible. We love to outsource choice, and to shortcut a decision wherever possible. We hate thinking the raw information through. And those things together, I think, are those various factors are going to lead to a world in which we really could wind up having lost some really fundamental skills, both in our individual brains and our ability to connect with each other.
Yeah, and that's a good example, actually, because I remember reading about those studies that were looking at London taxi drivers and how a certain part of their brain was so much enlarged because they were so amazing at navigating the maze that London is. But then after they retired and go away and actually stop using that anymore on a daily basis, I think it was in a fairly short period of time, like a couple of years, and they were kind of back to normal. And from then on, it's basically just kind of shrinkage, I think. But let's break it even further, even deeper. So what is a choice and why does it matter?
So that's a good one. I've had hundreds of conversations about this book and no one has ever asked me that question. So choice, I guess I would say, is the rare instance where your brain is asked to actually process what's going on around it and make a decision rather than I guess I would say two things. I think there's sort of two forms of choice as I have come to understand how our brain works based on the last 50, 60 years of behavioral science, right? Our brains are constantly making choices, but there are conscious and unconscious choices being made. And I think one of the big illusions, the cognitive illusions that govern a huge amount of our lives, is the idea that we are always making choices for ourselves, that our choices are individual and constant and conscious. I think that's an illusion, and I think your average behavioral scientist of almost any stripe would agree with me there. The vast majority of your decisions are made by an ancient instinctive circuitry that makes you think you're making the choice, but is actually just doing it on autopilot for you, essentially. A very small percentage of the time, we do in fact have to sit and say, oh, what is this choice? When you are asked by a judge, how do you plead? right? That's one of those raw, conscious choices where you have to sit and ponder and consult with your attorney and figure out, what am I going to say? Am I saying guilty or not guilty? Right? That's a real, conscious, powerful choice. But what we have learned from all of this research, from all the science that has been done, right, is that everything from what you eat to how much alcohol you drink. In my case, it was quite a bit before I had to quit drinking. This is one of the things I learned from my experience on this in this process. The even where you drive your car is very is almost always really an unconscious decision being made by a set of shortcuts, of cognitive shortcuts that your brain has made. So I think we overinflate our freedom in our brains for how we make choices, when in fact a huge amount of our choices are being made unconsciously and without our real awareness in any real sense. So I hope that's getting to your question, because this is a good one. Like I say, I've never been asked that one.
I just want to sort of part it off a little bit between the distinction of free will and actually what a choice is, because you kind of jumped into the, is there a free will? Do we actually make those choices more, rather than going into that? And I perhaps one way of saying it, a choice is basically the autonomous ability to weigh multiple possible options or multiple possibilities and choose independently of outside influence, if that's possible at all.
Right. I like
and
that. I
then
like that
maybe
idea.
we can argue then that, you're never independent from the environment you live in, from your background, from the chemical and biological reactions that happen, or electrochemistry in your brain. We can argue about whether there's a free will or not, but at least the perception of a choice is that you're making that decision. That's what we call a choice. You're weighing consciously and independently multiple options, and then supposedly on your own, or mostly on your own, you pick an option, one of them.
Yeah. I like that definition. And I would say that the thing that is so amazing about human beings is how unusual our brains are in having developed anything like the concept of a conscious choice. If you look, the rest of the animal kingdom doesn't do that. It doesn't. You don't have other animals for the most part. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions, and I hope a zoologist gets on here and tells me otherwise. But like, as I understand it, the vast majority of animals are not sitting there and going, I wonder what I should do next. They're just going from stimulus to stimulus. And in our case, right, what the literature teaches us is that our what you are describing, this taking in the information and making a decision in a conscious way, that's a very unusual and very new piece of software. We've been making decisions one way for millions of years, that ancient instinctive way, for millions of years, whereas it's really only a couple 100,000 years at most that we've been in a position where we actually think to ourselves, like, what happens after we die? Or I wonder if I should eat this or that. Only those kinds of decisions are very unusual inside human beings.
But on the other hand, you are arguing that we are highly constrained while making this apparent independent ability to choose because of a variety of things. So, and I wasn't planning to ask you this here, but so where does free will come into play here? Because forgive me and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed you were kind of almost, when I asked you the original question, you were kind of pushing a little bit much against free will. So whereabouts, which is fine. I've met a lot of scientists who do that. Like Michio Kaku, for example, was one of them. When I was interviewing him about The Future of the Mind, his book, that's one of the things he told me, that he didn't believe in free will.
I believe in free will, in that I believe that there are very beautiful and unusual circumstances under which human beings get to make a true choice in a conscious, considered, rational way. But I think but those are very unusual. You only get a certain number of them in your life, really. And what scientists like you've mentioned, tell us over and over again, that's right, is that there is that the vast majority of our experience on this earth is really in the grip of being held in the grip of certain guidance systems, and whether they are, as you say, electrochemical, or they're social, or they're genetic, or whatever it is, we're under a huge amount of influence all of the time. And I think that one of the great sort of illusions, one of the great myths that certainly in the United States we love to push, is this idea that we are somehow entirely in charge of ourselves. And that, one of the things that has been so important for my development intellectually is learning how much of the time that's not the case. And if anything, it's taught me to be much more protective over and proud of the handful of real, quote unquote, choices, free willed kind of choices that we get in our lives. And I want to, as a result, defend those more and more, which is part of why I think about this thing so much.
Yeah, and I hope I'm not going to go here sideways, but I want to differentiate even further, because it's an interesting topic that may be fruitful for you and me later on in our conversation. It may not be, but there's two different kinds of choices I want to talk about here for just 1 second. One kind of choice is like what people usually perceive choice to be. It's like chocolate, vanilla. And you're like, chocolate.
I like chocolate. Right, sure.
Now, that's the kind of general idea of what people perceive a choice is. But there's a different kind of choice, and that's what I would call the Stoic choice. That's what Nietzsche was talking about when he was talking about amor fati, loving fate. Because you may want vanilla, but life says to you chocolate. And you have no choice. Even though you prefer vanilla, you have no choice over the fact that you have been given chocolate. And then the Stoics say you can choose to love that too. And that's a whole other different kind of a level of a choice. It takes a lot more courage, a lot more commitment. And Nietzsche famously coined his phrase amor fati. Not just accepting fate, but loving it. Embracing it fully to the degree that you're loving it. And that's a different kind of a higher choice. Anyway, we'll see if that's going to come to be fruitful a little bit later in our conversation. It's kind of like one of those things.
I like that. I'd love to come back to that.
Yeah. But if you want to jump into it here now, you...
Well, I one thing I think about is just what I think Nietzsche and, Marcus Aurelius and the rest of them were kind of grappling with was, at a time where the risks and opportunities in life were much more constrained, and the experience of life, I think, was a little more, at least in Marcus Aurelius's time, certainly much more raw. And so it feels to me like they had the freedom, and it reminds me of Buddhist teachings too, right? This notion that you're going to lean into the idea that you can't really change anything. You can really only change your response to that thing. In this case, I think that I am simultaneously very, I've learned to be very accepting of this idea that we don't have as much choice as we're led to believe by, the movies and the rest of it.
But your book is an attempt to change that.
Yeah, because I do think that it is important for us to hold autonomy up as high as we can, and enshrine the value of free will as strong, as powerfully as we can. Because right now, I feel like the whole mechanism of modern society is trying to convince you that you've already got way more than you probably even deserve, and that it's an endless resource that can be worked by companies and marketers and political campaigns as much as they want to. And so I simultaneously have come to accept the limitations of my free will, and as a result, I think I've driven up the unit value of each moment I get to exercise free will in life.
Hence the surfing.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
Okay, so we covered your thesis, which is
Mm,
technology is diminishing the sphere of possible choices we can make.
mm.
We've covered what the choice is. Now tell me, how is it that technology actually diminishes choices? Because that's not self evident. I think most
Sure.
people would kind of intuitively push back at you and say, what are you talking about? I mean, technology is giving me the world of choices.
Right.
I don't have to wash my dishes. I don't have to do laundry every day for 2 hours.
Yep.
I can just press a button and all of those things happen to me, for me. And it's saving my time, saving my life, and therefore giving me choices to do other things rather than
Sure.
those things that our, grandparents even, or even parents in some cases, had to struggle with.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. So when people try to play the sort of the drinking game with me of like, what era of history would you rather live in? And they talk about wanting to go live in the Jazz Age, or live in the countryside in the 14th century. I just say to them like, listen, do you know what it was like to have a dental procedure in 1920? Like, do you know what it was like before antibiotics and antiseptic? Uh, you know, dying of a toothache in the 19th century. I mean, my God. So for
Rockefeller
me,
died of abscess, I think.
yeah, right. I mean, it just either most powerful man in the world, right, dies of that kind of thing. So this is the thing: is like, I don't want to in any way give the impression that I am anti-technology. I think science and technology are one of the great, they're some of the most amazing products of human consciousness we have. What I'm arguing in this book is, because we are led to believe as constantly as we are that we are in charge of our own choices all the time, and we don't like to in any way acknowledge how instinctive our decisions are and how much our circuitry is in control. It puts us into a position where what could be, and you combine those things with then the profit motive of companies, you wind up with a shrinking of choice that has to do with both the business strategy and the instinctive tendency, both of which want to take away as much choice as possible, because our brains, as any behavioral scientist will tell you, right, are they there are so many ways in which we try to outsource our choices when we can. We try to outsource our decisions to our environment, right? We will, if one of the reasons that I, as a former drinker, and other people like me don't go into bars is because when I go into a bar, the bar makes the choice for me. The smell of the bar and the dark wood paneling and all of the clinking of the bottles and all that stuff just screams time to drink, right? Because that's what my brain has come to associate that environment with. I'm outsourcing that choice to my environment. And this is what people who design chain restaurants can tell you, right? Is you are conditioning people to expect a certain thing with a certain environment. Is an incredibly powerful manipulative and persuasive tool. Another way you outsource your decision making is to your emotions. I spent time with mountain rescue specialists who dig people out of avalanches, and one of the things that we know to be true is that most people who get stuck in an avalanche, who get crushed in an avalanche as a skier or as a snowboarder, made the avalanche themselves. They usually set it off with their own skis and then wind up in it. And so one of the ways that mountain rescue people are taught to evaluate the snow, and it literally says it like in instructions on their shovels, it says, here is the process you're going to use to determine whether or not the snow is at risk of causing an avalanche today. They have to go through this elaborate process where you measure and pack snow to see what's going to happen. And it literally says in the instructions, don't make this choice with your emotions, because the science has shown us again and again that when you feel excited about the opportunity to go down a mountain, your ability to actually gauge the risk of doing so goes down. We outsource that risk assessment to our feelings. And so these are incredibly powerful ways that we that we hand off choice. So, this fast thinking, slow thinking brain, our ancient system versus our new system, they refer to as System 1 and System 2, as Daniel Kahneman's book, The Fast Thinking Brain, the Slow Thinking Brain. And one core of my thesis is, if you're a company that is trying to shape human behavior and sell to people, which of those two brains do you want to speak to? You don't want to speak to the one that thinks it through and is entering the guilty or not guilty plea. You want to speak to the one that says, let's go skiing, or I love drinking, right? That's the part of the brain you want to speak to. So for me, it is not that technology inherently limits choice, but this particular form of it, the AI-powered pattern recognition, behavior shaping industry that I think is coming, not even on purpose, but is coming just because of the circumstances, that is going to form a set of business incentives and psychological incentives that I just think are going to cause us to do less and less of that rare conscious thinking and more of these instinctive decision making.
Mm-hmm. You know, your argument really reminded me to a talk I gave 5 or 6 years ago at a conference organized by a futurist friend of mine called Dark Futures, which is devoted to exploring scenarios like that. And basically, that was the gist of my own argument at the time, which was, AI is telling us now what to watch, what to buy, who to date, where to study, where to work, where to travel, what books we should read, even whom to vote in some cases and things like that. And so ultimately, what it comes down to is our ability to choose and to self-determine. And so I am very, very sympathetic to your thesis. But let's assume.
Let me just jump on one thing, which is, I watched your talk at Dark Futures and thought that was exactly right. And this example that you give of AI will tell us what to watch. Here's the classic test of it, right? Imagine we live in the future that the SAG-AFTRA strike was all about, which was, arguing over this question of, are we going to live in a future in which you get to come home at the end of your day or wherever you are on your phone and say to a computer, I would like a movie tonight.
Yeah.
Make me a movie tonight, right? And for a little while, you might be in the realm of saying, okay, I want it to be with like Tom Hanks, and I want it to be like a Viking movie with a little bit of sex, but not too much sex. You're going to give it very specific instructions. But eventually you're going to come home and the computer's going to say to you, that service is going to say, hey, I made one that I think you're going to like. You want to see it? And you're going to say, yeah, go ahead. And that's the point at which you stop making choices, right? That's the thing, is you have the opportunity, of course, to choose any ice cream flavor you like. But if over and over again you're offered only the vanilla and chocolate choice, then that's all your brain is going to get used to thinking there is, in the same way that the only thing my brain thinks to do in a bar is drink. It's just the way that we're built.
And that's already a fact, by the way, with music songs, where people can just do a sentence or two of a prompt and then have a completely unique, one-of-a-kind, unique piece of music, even a whole song, based on your prompt, just for you, for that specific moment or mood or location or what have you. So the difference between a song and a movie is one of quantity, not really so much of a quality. It's not of a kind, right? They're the same kind.
That's right. Yep. I mean, Spotify for me, I'm the kind of person who once upon a time could tell you every, which bassist was left-handed and where she grew up, and I knew everything about every band I was into. Today, when people ask me, what are you listening to? I can name a couple of bands, but for the most part, I'm listening to what Spotify tells me is, my Discover Weekly is what I listen to mostly on Spotify. And that ends up being a world in which I can't tell you who that band is, right? And if it snuck an AI generated track in there, I'm not sure I would know, right? And so again, it's like there's the potential of choosing anything in the world, but the way our habits work and the way the system works winds up shrinking it down. It reminds me of Cory Doctorow's whole thesis that's going around so hard right now in shitification, right? It's that same. His is more about sort of a failure of quality over time, but it has to do, I think, with this, just that the tendency, both from a business strategy perspective and from our brains, moves us in a particular direction if we don't protect these very special, unusual decision making moments that we get so rarely.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Cory Doctorow's work. We've had him twice on my podcast.
Oh, cool.
Great guy, great books. I've read like probably 10 of his books.
He's so prolific. As a guy who struggled to bang out one book, I can't quite believe how many he puts out. It's incredible.
Yeah, I feel the same way. He's absolutely prolific. He can write I've seen him write his book in the middle of in a break, in a busy conference with a million people buzzing around him, and he's like writing his book. I'm like, how can you do that? That's
right. I mean, talk about that's a guy gets more conscious decisions than I do. His brain gives him more conscious decisions than I do.
Yeah, talk about the power of focus and self-determination.
Yeah, really,
and a
really.
real good role model to emulate, I think. But let's assume, Jake, that your thesis is correct for a second.
Good. Thank God. Let's do it.
Well, we may make the opposite assumption soon thereafter, but let's assume for now that it is correct. What's so bad about losing choice? I mean, someone would say, look, man, Amazon's been giving me the best suggestions for things that were so useful for me. And Netflix is lining up the best movies that me and my wife and my kids watch every time. And, Audible or Kindle is giving me the best, most fun books that I could possibly read one after another. What's wrong with
who cares?
them recommending the next pair of jeans or a shirt or a car or whatever? Like, isn't that going to make my life so much better and easier, and I don't have to waste my brain on useless, meaningless stuff?
Sure. And I think that, the role of free will in commerce and entertainment is not the hill I want to die on. Like, people who want to just listen to How Do I Start an F-16? If you've listened to that AI generated song, it's an incredible like sea shanty that gives you the instructions on how to start an F-16. It's a hilarious song, right? If you want to listen to that stuff forever, great, go for it. I'm not going to argue with you. I think we're going to eventually wind up in a world in which you're going to miss, the human ability to compose music. But let's take for argument's sake the idea that we're just going to like give away commerce and entertainment. Okay, I'm not. That's not the hill I'm going to die on. The hill I will die on is the place where we end up really beginning to build those same limited choice automated decision systems into other facets of life that are less optional. And I think we could have a good faith argument about whether art and music are optional. But, I've spoken, for instance, like here's one. And this raises a question. I don't know the answer to whether this is a good or a bad thing, but there's a whole world now of these mediation services, automated mediation technologies, in which a warring party, two people in conflict, are helped along by an automated system in the middle that kind of referees between them. People, for instance, who are getting divorced and need to co-parent a kid will wind up in divorce court, fighting over custody, fighting over arrangements. There's a whole industry now of services that will allow you, or in some cases, if you're required by your family court judge, force you to communicate through a text message interface that's monitored by an AI system. And in doing so, when you start to type, you'll never get another dollar from me, you lying sack of, it interrupts you and says, don't do that. If you write that, then you're going to wind up back in front of the judge. Is that what you want to do? Are you sure? It's a referee kind of system. And I've spoken to people who use those systems and they talk about them being incredible. that they get along better than they've ever gotten along before, that it's functional for the kid in a new way, and so who's to argue with the benefit of that? Well, I then think, okay, let's think a few generations ahead. And has that kid learned how to navigate difficult conversations with difficult people in his or her life? Or have they only learned to trust how a computer coaches them in doing it? Right? Has their emotional landscape been in any way improved? Right? Or are they just following instructions? I honestly don't know the answer to that one. So that one is, that's a in between one we could have an argument about. Then there's ones where at the sort of the most bare bones level, you have people who are desperately trying to cut costs in the provision of really essential state and regional and federal services and trying to work automated systems into it. So I've talked to people at the University of Baltimore. They have a law clinic there that deals with people who've been wrongly denied their benefits, SNAP benefits, housing, welfare. And the law professor that runs that clinic told me that when they go to court to try and fight on the behalf of their clients, and they discover that it tends to be an automated system that's made this determination, and not only can nobody at the agency explain how that determination was made, but even the company that makes the system can't tell them how the determination was made. And so, choice has been taken out of it. And on the one hand, you could argue, well, good that we're taking the possibility of, we're taking choice away from like some potentially racist or ageist or, blood sugar is low kind of, human decision making. Okay, maybe. But when you get to a place where the choice is made entirely by an automated system and you have no idea why, and that's literally leading to whether or not you're going to be able to put food on the table or have a house over, a roof over your kids' heads. Now we're in a world where it seems to me that this winnowing of choice, the automating of choice, really can lead somewhere problematic. And you read the book, but like I have example after example of places where when you hand choices over to an automated system and you not only run the risk of it making a bad decision, but you are, because your brain just works this way, my brain works this way, you're given to just abandoning your critical faculties because you think, you know what, the computer will take it from here. I'm good. And so that to me is it. It's not about this, do I want my ads better tailored to me on my social media feed? It's about these really fundamental areas of life in which this stuff is going to start making choices for us. And that to me, I think is a hill we have to die on.
Yeah, and the examples are endless almost. From, for example, interviews for future employees where companies use AI to basically scan through thousands of applicants who are forced to do, some kind of a written and some kind of a video submission. And then there is no human actually looking at these submissions at all. They're completely sifted through via AI. And nobody knows why you get the results you get, because it's and here comes Cory Doctorow's enshittification argument, is because it's a proprietary algorithm which decided how it should work, or what's the best employee for your startup company and whatever. You actually are not allowed to have a look and peek under the hood and see what's the algorithm like, how is it making the choices it's making. So you're completely surrendering your autonomy to make those decisions. And your argument is basically that one step at a time, you end up in a world where we don't have those decisions under our control anymore.
That's right. And we like to believe that it's the what I'm going to watch tonight kind of decisions that we are most likely to give away. But the other cruel irony of all the behavioral science is that we love to give away complex moral decisions. If we can get rid of having to make a difficult choice, we do it. And those difficult choices include things like, who should I give this job to? Who should I give a loan to? Who should I give bail to? And so you've seen in each of those categories the rise of huge industries of automated decision systems. And that's because if we can be absolved of both the tedium and the just the, you know, ickiness of having to make difficult decisions, we'll do it. And so that's the other part for me, is that, we love, and then when that job screening, employment, application AI, it can start screening people out for age or race in all kinds of creepy ways that you wouldn't even know, and winds up, and before you know it, you wind up with a job force that where no one has kids, and that's the better thing for the management. And we just wind up in this world where it can just start to slide out of control so quickly, in the name of, as you say, as Cory Doctorow argues, in the name of protecting proprietary algorithms, or because it just feels better than having to make those choices ourselves. And I just think we wind up empowering, we run the risk of really empowering some very ancient and dangerous instincts that I think are going to drive us backwards rather than forward.
I think the best metaphor is it used to happen a lot. It doesn't happen anymore. But it still holds as a metaphor. When Google Earth came to be, especially in the beginning, when it became super popular, there were all those people who were just following the instructions and would end up in the water. Like, end up in the freaking sea. Right. I just followed Google's instructions. And, against any and every kind of obvious common sense clue that you can get just by sort of looking where you're driving, and you end up driving in the freaking ocean.
And we can all laugh at people who've made that mistake, right, and roll our eyes at their idiocy. But the truth of the matter is, like, think about the last time that you accidentally drove to a place you didn't intend to go. Because, for me, whenever I have to take my kids to a morning, doctor's appointment rather than to school, I inevitably wind up driving them to school by accident and then going, oh, whoops, sorry, whoa, I got to take them to the dentist. This was the wrong place to come. Like, anytime you've ever wound up in the parking lot of a place that you didn't intend to drive to, and you suddenly come to and realize, wow, I've been driving all this time and I didn't even think about it, right? That's that same thing at work. And so your brain just says, I know this, I got this one, and in the same way, when Google says, oh, we'll take it from here, your brain goes, sounds great, go for it. That's how our brains do it. That's why we're alive. I mean, honestly, it's part of our evolutionary gift. It's not just a bad thing. It's been a good thing. It's a money saver. It's a time saver. But it is a thing that affects all of us.
Yeah, actually, in your book, you say that the brain is a shortcut engine, constantly trying to offload heavy cognitive tasks. So say more about that.
Yeah. So one of the best ways of exemplifying it for me, the one that really blew my mind, was there's a Yale researcher named Yarrow Dunham who does research with kids, where he'll bring like 4, 5, and 6-year-old kids into his lab, and he'll randomly put them into one of 2 sets of shirts, orange or green. And then within about 90 seconds, it really takes him no time at all, he can have them making wild assumptions about each other based on the color of their shirts. And the way he does it is he'll put them in front of these ambiguous scenes where a kid is crying, lying in the dirt underneath an empty swing, and another kid is standing behind them. And depending on what shirts they're wearing and what shirt the kid is wearing who's watching this scene, the interpretation is literally 180 degrees. It's either, oh, that kid pushed the kid out of the swing, or that kid fell out of the swing and the nice kid is about to help her up, right? And it has to do with, as he says, like, our ability, our tribalism is so powerful and so immediate that it just it takes the wheel whenever we give it the opportunity. And the really crazy part is, our brains are also bean counters. All they want to do is keep track of how many instances a thing has taken place and begin to compile this assumption whenever we can, so we don't have to think it through every time.
Evidence.
That's what right? Evidence. And so as a result, this total misapprehension of the scene that's based on just the color of the shirt over time, they begin to build up this assumption that, oh, kids in green shirts are always mean. Oh, the kids in orange shirts, they're so nice. That's how they are. And the whole thing is an illusion, but in your brain, it feels like fact. And so that is a huge part of it is this, and, and this is why I think people have such trouble differentiating between, that's why we don't know when ChatGPT is lying to us. I mean, I have story after story of people just like, the second they're handed a decision by a system they don't understand, they abandon all their critical faculties. They become those people that accidentally drive their kids to school when they mean to go to the dentist. It's just what it is, So it's just core. It's core to our programming.
So if the brain is a shortcut engine, then is story the most efficient and perhaps also the most dangerous shortcut?
I think it absolutely is. I mean, when that anecdote I shared about the dinner party of tech people and these addiction experts, when these addiction experts were standing in front of the crowd, and I just want to mention that the name of their consultancy was Dopamine. That was what they were calling themselves as a pair of experts for hire. They were describing that one of the sort of most amazing things about the brain's capacity for addiction is not just the habitual cycle it gets stuck in, but the ways in which it reverse engineers a story to explain its compulsion. So, they basically say if you habituate someone to something long enough, they'll begin to just fill in a narrative that explains it. Oh, I've always been this way. Oh, I'm a runner. I'm just obsessed with that thing, whatever it is. And what they then were proselytizing in this presentation was, you can use that to your advantage. If you can trick someone into doing a thing over and over again, you don't even have to come up with a good marketing strategy for explaining for helping them build an identity around it. They'll just fill it in themselves. So don't worry about it. So you're absolutely right. Like, but of course you can use that, as these folks would have argued at the time, for good, right? People become quote unquote addicted to Peloton, right? They become addicted to a certain kind of vitamin regime or a book series they love, right? You can exploit these systems in the formation of positive habits, but what we know, of course, is that people also love to build stories around things that serve their political purposes or their commercial purposes, and that winds up becoming a whole other risk.
So is story the poison or the cure then?
I think it's a little of both, right? It's part of it's how we process the choices we've made, and as a result, it can push us down either road. I think it just that that capacity evolved as a survival and efficiency mechanism and has just now been commandeered by a set of incentives and systems that didn't exist when we were refining those systems back on the savannah once upon a time, right? It's a totally different landscape, which means that those ancient story following instincts, which have been hugely useful for so long, are just they're maladapted to this new commercial world and are getting hijacked as a result.
Yeah, speaking of systems that didn't exist, your book came out before ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. So let me break this question into two steps. So first of all, has it gotten better or worse in time since your book originally came out? Are you more worried today or less worried based on what you've seen since? And secondly, how does ChatGPT play into your argument?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was, I thought I was early. I thought I was like 5 years early on this topic, and I didn't realize how quickly transformer models were going to make a commercial product possible. I think when I was really in the thick of finishing this book, writing it most intensely, and I don't write like Cory Doctorow. I have to actually be alone and be in my basement. So so it took me longer than it does him. But, but was between 2016 and 2020, which is this period of time that, was a time of real moral reckoning in the tech industry, where you couldn't recruit young people to work for your company unless you could convince them that you were doing something morally positive.
Yeah.
And so I think I nonetheless, because I just have covered this industry so long and I've been it's made me, I think, somewhat cynical about people's motivations. I still was very dubious that that was going to be enough, that this kind of and I kept saying, this is a fad. This is fashion. It's cool to be a moral and progressive CEO, but someday it's not going to be. And when it's not, that's going to be a real problem. I don't think I realized how quickly that day was going to come, because I think that's where we're at now, where suddenly no one wants to really talk about being on the right side of history anymore. And so that part I knew was coming. I didn't know how fast it was coming. What I didn't see coming was the absolutely cult-like zealotry of a bunch of the folks at the top of the pyramid when it came to what they believed AI was going to make possible. So the way that folks at the top of this industry proselytize a utopia and simultaneously use the promise of that utopia to co-opt the kinds of worries that people have and use them almost as marketing. So things like the possibility that these systems break free and become, sentient and enslave us all is a thing that they talk about very openly, right? You even have, like, Dario Amodei, head of Anthropic, said in an interview with Axios, he said, we might cure cancer, we might balance the budget, but you might have 20% unemployment. And so I'm very worried about, you should be worried about what we're making, which is just the weirdest kind of marketing doublespeak, and that I didn't see coming, was this sort of clear conviction on these people's parts that this is going to be worth it. And so let's plow ahead anyway. I figured they would do much more like what they were doing in 2016 to 2020, which was, apologizing. We've got so much more work to do, trying to sort of appear kind of the more, take moral leadership. That's all gone in this way that I would say is very discouraging to me, and then.
If I were to hop in for a second here, in your book, you talk about how the brain is an engine of sort of shortcutting and offloading heavily demanding sort of cognitive tasks. Yep. I think the sublime ultimate culmination of that is and also most dangerous culmination of that, in my opinion, is the ultimate idea which we're being peddled nowadays, which is the idea that anything and everything added to AI or combined with AI will inevitably be exponentially better.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's right. That's exactly
right. So
right.
AI, it's kind of the silver bullet hypothesis went wild. It's kind of like any problem. So, okay, we have a problem with our political system. Oh, let's just get rid of all the humans and have AI run the show. Let's AI run our civilization. It couldn't be any worse than humanity, right? All of our problems, hunger, global warming, you name it, everything, war, of course, Gaza, every problem in the world will be solved only if you added AI to it.
That's right. That's exactly right. No, I mean, you hear it in what Elon Musk has to say, right? He talks simultaneously about, we won't need to work anymore, that work will be a thing of the past. And then somebody asked him, well, what advice do you have for your kids in how to educate themselves and be ready for the future when AI comes? And he had no answer for that. He had no answer for that, right? There's this total sort of it is all the hallmarks of cult like logic in that it is inarguable and totally illogical, and flies in the face of anything that has come before. And so I agree with you completely there.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of that kind of shortcut offloading that our brains tend to think. And people kind
Yeah.
of translate it from, let's say, its inevitable efficiency and usefulness in a certain kind of a business context, let's say. And then you're making the logical jump that, therefore, if it works here, you can work with this everywhere. It's kind
Yes.
of another example of what some people have called as the God complex, which is like, if you're an expert in one field and you're really good at it, doctors often have that complex, but probably
Billionaires also
entrepreneurs,
have this conflict.
most of all billionaires, yes,
Yeah,
more than anyone
right.
else, is like your presumption is, if I'm good at, rockets or batteries or whatever, I will be inevitably equally, if not good, in government, in politics,
That's
in
right.
solving
That's right.
all those complex and complicated, long-standing social issues that we've had for, in some cases, hundreds, if not thousands of years.
That's right. That's right.
So I think that's another example taken from the human realm into the AI realm. It works here,
Yeah.
therefore it would work everywhere. So, okay, and I've been doing these conversations now for 16 years, and I'm not against AI at all, but I share your concerns, and
Mhm.
unfortunately, I share most of your observations and kind of
Mhm.
fears, if you will. And I don't even go surfing. So
I highly recommend it. That's how I break free from my
yeah,
feelings
I'm in
about this stuff.
Toronto, Canada, so that's not an
Oh yeah,
option.
no.
But I do
No,
road
no.
biking, and that seems to help a lot.
There you go. There you go.
So where should we go next? Let's talk a little bit about the solution looking for a problem. You write
Mm-hmm.
in your book that computing is often a solution looking for a problem. Where does this
Mm-hmm.
mindset lead us? How does it amplify the loop?
Mm-hmm. So I think that the so I'm working right now on a new project that I've tentatively entitled "Great Ideas We Should Not Pursue." And it is based on something my grandfather used to say. He worked for the Ford Foundation and traveled all over the world trying to basically push American style education systems on post-colonial countries, basically to try and keep them capitalist and keep them from becoming communists in a way. That was not his personal goal, but that's kind of what he was charged with. And but he was a very thoughtful guy. He was woke before there was woke. He really just was a very culturally sensitive and interesting guy, and always recognized when uh, colonists were poised to really screw something up. And so he was always bombarded, he said, with these people, CIA people or people from Wharton or, any of these sort of business school or government types who would say to him, like, we should do this in India, we should do this. And he would always say, that's a great idea. Let's not do that. That was always his response. And I have such respect for that, especially in the world that I cover now, because when you really look back across really, certainly American history, but even world history, it's hard to find places where we had the potential to build a thing and decided to have a little restraint about it. We're not great at that, especially in the United States. There are very few places I've been able to find in which people came up with a great idea they did not pursue. I think about this in AI is of course a big part of this, but I think about this in genetic predictive and genetic engineering instincts, which are now a big Silicon Valley thing. There's a whole industry now of companies offering you the chance to screen your kid for genetic predictors of this or that outcome, and maybe even tweak in the future them. Sam Altman and his husband are one of the big backers of one of these companies. And that kind of, if we can meddle with it, we should meddle with it attitude is really just a big part of our programming. I don't have a good theory as to why that is, but boy, is it constant. And so for me, there's something about, I mean, you mentioned the Stoics. There's something about trying to come back to a conscious assessment rather than an instinctive decision of what we need, what needs to happen here, that I think we have to get to. We're not there right now. And that's my next thing, is thinking about what's a framework for judging something beyond market fit, minimally viable product, and investment runway. We got to think smarter than that.
Well, I think that going back to our Stoic and ethical roots really will help, because ethics, classical Greco-Roman ethics is about having the power to do something, but choosing not to.
Right.
Like, that's why Marcus Aurelius was so amazing, because he was the emperor, king, living God for the biggest empire in the history of the world to that point, at least. And yet he managed to retain his humility and his humanity. And that's, to me, that role model I'm looking for. One of a kind, really. But time is advancing here, Jake, and I know you have to go in 13 minutes. So let me just ask, if technology is actually diminishing our choices, what can we actually do to reverse this trend? I mean, how can we leave our audience not depressed and annoyed and upset from our conversation so far? What can we do? What can we give them, something positive to hang on, or as a direction, or as an inspiration that could actually make short, medium, or long-term difference in reversing that scary trend for the both of us?
So I take comfort from two areas of possible solution. The first one is cultural. I think that we as a society, in spite of the way we roll our eyes together at people who drive their car off the dock because Google Maps told them to, I think there is, in fact, an enormous appetite culturally for authentic decision making, difficult choices, true creativity. My 12-year-old was just the other day saying, she said, boy, I wish I could do this piece of art as well as this piece of AI makes it, but I don't like that I feel that way. And I really like making art, even though it's not as good as that. And that instinct, right, is so smart and powerful and everywhere. I think we are all recognizing, oh, there are so many things that we could make more efficient, like never leaving our house and taking a walk with a friend, right? But we recognize, oh, there's something really powerful and important in that. And I'm seeing that both in the ways in which people, I go to events and I see people walking around, young people in their early 20s walking around with point and shoot cameras right now. There's so many people wanting to take photos that way. And I just see that they're clearly plugging into something that technology has obviated. Technology means they don't have to do that anymore. But there are whole companies that want to say, never take a picture again. You will just generate them for you, right? But people clearly want to observe and reflect reality in their own way. They want to mediate it themselves. And I like that a lot. I also love, there's a term going around in the US among young people right now when it comes to AI. They say the word clanker as a derogatory term for AI. They'll talk about like an AI, like a chatbot, they'll refer to as a clanker. Or old people like me, right, who use AI too much, they'll be like, don't be a clanker. That kind of cultural allergy, I take a lot of comfort from, because I think it's going to push back against some of what these companies want to push on us. The other thing is legal. So in the United States, we have typically not done a great job of regulating anything other than either death or financial loss. We're good at regulating against those two things. But I think that we are on the verge of beginning to regulate against a certain kind of psychological harm that's, I think, going to be increasingly quantified and trotted out as evidence in a way that's going to cost these companies big money and become a form of liability that companies in the future are not going to want any part of. I mean, you're already seeing just this week, the three of the biggest insurers in the United States have basically gone to American regulators and said, we don't want to have to cover AI related losses in our corporate contracts. Please absolve us of having to do that. So even the insurance people can see that there's huge risk going on there. That's financial risk, right? But AI risk is becoming recognized. And we are seeing now lawsuit after lawsuit starting to pile up around people experiencing really serious mental health crises at the hands of these chatbots. And I think those lawsuits, I think there's a good case to be made. And once we get into a place where case law has been established that you're not allowed to mess with somebody's mental health, you're not allowed to mess with their choices in this way that we've always assumed was somehow okay, I think we're going to be on a path towards some regulations that are going to make some sense and be actually protective. I think the assumption has always been, or at least when you talk to tech people, they're always saying, "Oh, well, people have to make their own choices. We have to educate people, media literacy, blah 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 blah." As a former drinker, I'll tell you, there's the line at the bottom of the liquor ads that says "drink responsibly." There's no such thing, right? And I think putting the onus on an alcoholic to not drink in a bar is ridiculous. Don't go in the bar, right? And don't let the bar come to you, right? These are rules that we could establish. And so I think we're on the verge of establishing some stuff around some rules around behavior modification. I'm calling it AI distortion, and doing some work with a colleague around the concept of AI betrayal. We're kind of working on some concepts trying to make we're trying to, it won't be as cool as enshittification, but I'm trying to make a framework for thinking about these things. But I think that's coming. And so, Nicola, I'm taking some comfort from that.
Yeah, there's a great article that came out a couple of days ago by Rutger Bregman about how big tech has our attention and now it wants our affection. But there's already a movement resisting back. And he gives historical examples of that resistance going public and massive, and the sobriety, anti-alcohol kind of movement that happened sort of like late 19th, early 20th century is one of the best examples he came up with as a historian. So there are positive precedents in the past that can give us some hope that we can make a difference in the future or for the future. Jake, time is advancing here. So where can people find more about you, your book, and your work in general?
Well, Nicola, let me first say what a wonderful, thoughtful conversation. I so appreciate you taking the time to read the book, and you had such thoughtful questions. You literally asked me a bunch of questions I've never been asked before, so I really, really enjoyed this. I am a podcaster myself. I have a podcast called The Rip Current that comes out most days of the week right now. I'm on a real push. We look at the big invisible forces that are guiding us to and fro without our realizing it. That's the rip current. It's a surfing reference, but it has to do with being pulled this way and that without realizing it. And the ripcurrent.com is the easiest way to find that. I'm on all of the platforms, Substack. I have a YouTube channel at the Rip Current. I'm trying to grow all of those audiences, which would of course be great. For some reason, my biggest following is on TikTok. I don't understand why young people want to listen to me, but for some reason they do. And that's been a really cool and fun audience to speak to. So yeah, but the Rip Current is the main place to do it.
Fantastic. So Jake, what's your final parting message that you want to send us away with? What's the one thing that you would like for me and especially our audience to take away from this, 85 minute conversation we've had with you today?
Well, I guess I would just say that in spite of the total bummer that I know so many of my concepts I really am a very optimistic and positive person when it comes to humanity. I just feel lucky to be able to be on this planet and together in the way we are. And the ways in which we have managed in our our civilization to the fact that I can get out on the highway and drive at 65 miles an hour and the person in the next lane stays in their lane. The fact that you and I from different backgrounds can speak to one another and neither of us is going to die, like no one's going to kill anybody else. I mean, we are so advanced as a civilization. And I really just think we should congratulate ourselves for that. But part of that congratulations for me has to do with protecting the things that are best about being human. And that have to do with connecting with one another, doing selfless acts for each other, pointless acts of creativity, right? These are pieces of friction. They don't make our lives easier, but they make our lives vastly more satisfying. And I think there's a whole industry right now trying to convince you that short-term dopamine hits are the source of happiness. And what we know, Georgia O'Keeffe has a fantastic quote about this where she says, it's not, happiness is fleeting. The only thing that really lasts is interest. And I just think we need to focus instead on this notion that there is a deeper well of satisfaction available to us than just being entertained and made more efficient. And I think we can feel it. We can all see it. And I think we just need to sort of name that and protect that wonderful friction of being human, because that's really the best part of being who we are.
Protecting the best things that make us human and the ability to make a free choice definitely ranks among the top of that list in my book and in your book in particular, called The Loop, which I really appreciated and really enjoyed, and I highly recommend. So, Jacob Ward, thank you so much for being with us today.
Nicola, this was epic. I really appreciate it.